Hello, welcome to the Short Story Workshop. I'm Matt Bowles. I'm joined by Melody Bowles and Simone King. In just a moment, we're going to read this week's story, which is The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells, and then we'll talk about it. But first, Mel, why did you choose this story in particular?
I chose this story because it made me laugh and it was fun and it was random and I just didn't know what was going to happen next. So I just wanted to keep reading it and I thought this will be a good one. And then I thought about it for a bit and thought actually this is quite a sad story, which I'll talk a bit more later. Um, but yeah, that's why I chose it.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't fun one. I hadn't picked up on that. But yeah, so let's get started. Here is The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells.
I had seen the magic shop from afar several times. I had passed it once or twice, a shop window of alluring little objects, magic balls, magic hens, wonderful cones, ventriloquist dolls, the material of the basket trick, packs of cards that looked all right, and all that sort of thing, but never had I thought of going in until one day, almost without warning, Jip hauled me by my finger right up to the window, and so conducted himself that there was nothing for it but to take him in. I had not thought the place was there, to tell the truth, a modest-sized frontage in Regent Street, between the picture shop and the place where the chicks run about just out of patent incubators, but there it was, sure enough. I had fancied it was down nearer the Circus or round Wood Street, or even in Holborn, always over the way and a little inaccessible it had been, with something of the mirage in its position, but here it was now, indisputably. His pointing finger made a noise upon the. If I was dabbing a finger at the disappearing egg, I'd buy myself that, and that, which was the crying baby, very human, and that, which was a mystery, and called, so a neat card asserted, buy one and astonish your friends. Anything, said Jip, will disappear under one of those cones. I have read about it in a book. And there, Dada, is the vanishing halfpenny, only they've put it this way up, so's we can't see how it's done. Jip, dear boy, inherits his mother's breeding, and he did not propose to enter the shop or worry in any way. Only, you know, quite unconsciously, he lugged my finger doorward, and he made his interest clear. That, he said, and pointed to the magic bottle. If you had that, I said, at which promising inquiry he looked up with a sudden radiance. I could show it to Jessie, he said, thoughtful as ever of others. It's less than 100 days to your birthday, Gibbles, I said, and laid my hand on the door handle. Jip made no answer, but his grip tightened on my finger, and so we came into the shop. It was no common shop, this. It was a magic shop, and all the prancing precedence Jip would have taken in the matter of mere toys was wanting. He left the burthen of the conversation to me. It was a little narrow shop, not very well lit, and the doorbell pinged again with a plaintive note as we closed it behind us. For a moment or so we were alone and could glance about us. There was a tiger in papier-mâché on the glass case that covered the low counter, a grave, kind-eyed tiger that waggled his head in a methodical manner. There were several crystal spheres, a china hand holding magic cards, a stock of magic fish bowls in various sizes, and an immodest magic hat that shamelessly displayed its springs. On the floor were magic mirrors, one to draw you out long and thin, one to swell your head and vanish your legs, and one to make you short and fat like a draught. And while we were laughing at these, the shopman, as I suppose, came in. At any rate, there he was behind the counter, a curious, sallow, dark man, with one ear larger than the other and a chin like the toe-cap of a boot. "What can we have the pleasure?" he said, spreading his long magic fingers on the glass case, and so with a start we were aware of him. "I want," I said, "to buy my little boy a few simple tricks." "Legerdemain?" he asked. "Mechanical? Domestic? Anything amusing?" said I. Said the shopman, and scratched his head for a moment as if thinking. Then, quite distinctly, he drew from his head a glass ball. "Something in this way," he said, and held it out. The action was unexpected. I had seen the trick done at entertainments endless times before. It's part of the common stock of conjurers, but I had not expected it here. "That's good," I said with a laugh. "Isn't it?" said the shopman. Jip stretched out his disengaged hand to take this object, and found merely a blank palm. "It's in your pocket," said the shopman, and there it was. "How much will that be?" I asked. "We make no charge for glass balls," said the shopman politely. "We get them." He picked one out of his elbow as he spoke. "Free." He produced another from the back of his neck, and laid it beside its predecessor on the counter. Jip regarded his glass ball sagely, then directed a look of inquiry at the two on the counter, and finally brought his round-eyed scrutiny to the shopman, who smiled. "You may have those too," said the shopman, "and if you don't mind, one from my mouth. So!" Jip counselled me mutely for a moment, and then in a profound silence put away the 4 balls, resumed my reassuring finger, and nerved himself for the next event. "We get all our smaller tricks in that way," the shopman remarked. I laughed in the manner of one who subscribes to a jest. "Instead of going to the wholesale shop," I said. "Of course, it's cheaper." "In a way," the shopman said, "though we pay in the end, but not so heavily as people suppose. Our larder tricks, and our daily provisions, and all the things we want, we get out of that hat. And you know, sir, if you'll excuse my saying it, there isn't a wholesale shop. Not for genuine magic goods, sir. I don't know if you noticed our inscription, the Genuine Magic Shop." He drew a business card from his cheek and handed it to me. "Genuine," he said with his finger on the word, and added, "There is absolutely no deception, sir." He seemed to be carrying out the joke pretty thoroughly, I thought. He turned to Jip with a smile of remarkable affability. You know, are the right sort of boy." I was surprised at his knowing that, because in the interest of discipline we keep it rather a secret even at home, but Jip received it in unflinching silence, keeping a steadfast eye on him. "It's only the right sort of boy that gets through that doorway." And as if by way of illustration there came a rattling at the door, and a squeaking little voice could be faintly heard. "Nyah, I wanna go in there, Dada, I wanna go in there. Nyah, ah," and then the accents of a downtrodden parent urging consolations and propitiations. "It's locked, Edward," he said. "But it isn't," said I. "It is, sir," said the shopman, "always, for that sort of child." And as he spoke we had a glimpse of the other youngster, a little white face, pallid from sweet-eating and over-sapid food, and distorted by evil passions, a ruthless little egotist pawing at the enchanted pane. "It's no good, sir," said the shopman, as I moved, with my natural helpfulness, doorward, and presently the spoilt child was carried off howling. "How do you manage that?" I said, breathing a little more freely. "Magic," said the shopman, with a careless wave of the hand, and behold! Sparks of coloured fire flew out of his fingers and vanished into the shadows of the shop. "You were saying," he said, addressing himself to Jip, "before you came in, that you would like one of our 'Buy One and Astonish Your Friends' boxes." Jip, after a gallant effort, said, "Yes, it's in your pocket," and leaning over the counter (he really had an extraordinarily long body), this amazing person produced the article in the customary conjurer's manner. "Paper," he said, and took a sheet out of the empty hat with the springs. "String," and behold his mouth was a string box, from which he drew an unending thread, which, when he had tied his parcel, he bit off, and, it seemed to me, swallowed the ball of string. And then he lit a candle at the nose of one of the ventriloquist dummies, snuck one of his fingers, which had become sealing-wax red, into the flame, and so sealed the parcel. "Then there was the disappearing egg," he remarked, and produced one from within my coat-breast, and packed it, and also the crying baby, very human. I handed each parcel to Jip as it was ready. He clasped them to his chest. He said very little, but his eyes were eloquent. The clutch of his arms was eloquent. He was the playground of unspeakable emotions. These, you know, were real magics. Then, with a start, I discovered something moving about in my hat, something soft and jumpy. I whipped it off, and a ruffled pigeon, no doubt a confederate, dropped out and ran on the counter, and went, I fancy, into a cardboard box behind the papier-mâché tiger. "Tut, tut," said the shopman, dexterously relieving me of my headdress. "Careless bird, and as I live, nesting." He shook my hat, and shook out into his extended hand 2 or 3 eggs, a large marble, a watch, about half a dozen of the inevitable glass balls, and then crumpled, crinkled paper, more and more and more, talking all the time of the way in which people neglect to brush their hats inside as well as out, politely, of course, but with a certain personal application. "All sorts of things accumulate, sir. Not you, of course, in particular. Nearly every customer. Astonishing what they carry about with them." The crumpled paper rose and billowed on the counter more and more and more, until he was nearly hidden from us, until he was altogether hidden, and still his voice went on and on. "We none of us know what the fair semblance of a human being may conceal, sir. Are we all then no better than brushed exteriors, whited sepulchres?" His voice stopped, exactly like when you hit a neighbour's gramophone with a well-aimed brick, the same instant silence, and the rustle of the paper stopped, and everything was still. "Have you done with my hat?" I said after an interval. There was no answer. I stared at Jip, and Jip stared at me, and there were our distortions in the magic mirrors, looking very rum and grave and quiet. "I think we'll go now," I said. "Will you tell me how much all this comes to?" "I say," I said on a rather louder note, "I want the bill, and my hat, please." It might have been a sniff from behind the paper pile. "Let's look behind the counter, Jip," I said. "He's making fun of us." I led Jip round the head-wagging tiger, and what do you think there was behind the counter? No one at all. Only my hat on the floor, and a common conjurer's lop-eared white rabbit lost in meditation, and looking as stupid and crumpled as only a conjurer's rabbit can do. I resumed my hat, and the rabbit lolloped a lollop or so out of my way. "Dada," said Jip in a guilty whisper. "What is it, Jip?" said I. I do like this shop, Dada. So should I said to myself, if the counter wouldn't suddenly extend itself to shut one off from the door. But I didn't call Jip's attention to that. Pussy, he said with a hand out to the rabbit as it came lolloping past us. Pussy, do Jip a magic. And his eyes followed it as it squeezed through a door I had certainly not remarked a moment before. Then this door opened wider, and the man with one ear larger than the other appeared again. He was smiling still, but his eye met mine with something between amusement and defiance. "You'd like to see our showroom, sir?" he said, with an innocent suavity. Jip tugged my finger forward. I glanced at the counter and met the shopman's eye again. I was beginning to think the magic just a little too genuine. "We haven't very much time," I said, but somehow we were inside the showroom before I could finish that. "All goods of the same quality," said the shopman, rubbing his flexible hands together, "and that is the best. Nothing in the place that isn't genuine magic and warranted thoroughly rum. Excuse me, sir." I felt him pull at something that clung to my coat sleeve, and then I saw he held a little wriggling red demon by the tail. The little creature bit and fought and tried to get at his hand, and in a moment he tossed it carelessly behind a counter. No doubt the thing was only an image of twisted india rubber, but for the moment, and his gesture was exactly that of a man who handles some petty biting bit of vermin. I glanced at Jip, but Jip was looking at a magic rocking horse. I was glad he hadn't seen the thing. "I say," I said in an undertone, indicating Jip and the red demon with my eyes, "you haven't many things like that about, have you?" "None of ours. Probably brought in with you," said the shopman, also in an undertone, and with a more dazzling smile than ever. "Astonishing what people will carry about with them unawares." And then to Jip, "Do you see anything you fancy here?" There were many things that Jip fancied there. He turned to this astonishing tradesman with mingled confidence and respect. "Is that a magic sword?" he said. "A magic toy sword. It neither bends, breaks, nor cuts the fingers. It renders the bearer invincible in battle against anyone under 18. Half a crown to 7 and sixpence according to size. These panoplies on cards are for juvenile knights errant and very useful. Shield of safety, sandals of swiftness, helmet of invisibility." "Oh, Daddy!" gasped Jip. I tried to find out what they cost, but the shopman did not heed me. He had got Jip now. He had got him away from my finger. He had embarked upon the exposition of all his confounded stock, and nothing was going to stop him. Presently I saw with a qualm of distrust, and something very like jealousy, that Jip had hold of this person's finger as usually he has hold of mine. No doubt the fellow was interesting, I thought, and had an interestingly faked lot of stuff, really good faked stuff, still. I wandered after them, saying very little but keeping an eye on this prestidigital fellow. After all, Jip was enjoying it, and no doubt when the time came to go we should be able to go quite easily. It was a long, rambling place, that showroom, a gallery broken up by stands and stools and pillars, with archways leading off to other departments, in which the queerest-looking assistants loafed and stared at one, and with perplexing mirrors and curtains. So perplexing indeed were these that I was presently unable to make out the door by which we had come. The shopman showed Jip magic trains that ran without steam or clockwork, just as you set the signals, and then some very, very valuable boxes of soldiers, that all came alive directly you took off the lid and said. I myself haven't a very quick ear, and it was a tongue-twisting sound, but Jip, he has his mother's ear, got it in no time. "Bravo!" said the shopman, putting the men back into the box unceremoniously and handing it to Jip. "Now," said the shopman, and in a moment Jip had made them all alive again. "You'll take that box?" asked the shopman. "We'll take that box," said I, "unless you charge its full value, in which case it would need a trust magnate." "Dear heart, no!" said the shopman, swept the little man back again, shut the lid, waved the box in the air, and there it was, in brown paper, tied up and with Jip's full name and address on the paper. The shopman laughed at my amazement. "This is the genuine magic," he said. "The real thing." "It's a little too genuine for my taste," I said again. After that he fell to showing Jip tricks, odd tricks, and still odder the way they were done. He explained them, he turned them inside out, and there was the dear little chap nodding his busy bit of a head in the sagest manner. I did not attend as well as I might. "Hey presto!" said the shopman, and then would come the clear small "Hey presto!" of the boy. But I was distracted by other things. It was being borne in upon me just how tremendously rum this place was. It was, so to speak, inundated by a sense of rumness. There was something a little rum about the fixtures even, about the ceiling, about the floor, about the casually distributed chairs. I had a queer feeling that whenever I wasn't looking at them straight they went askew, and moved about, and played a noiseless puss in the corner behind my back, and the cornice had a serpentine design with masks, masks altogether too expressive for a proper plaster. Then abruptly my attention was caught by one of the odd-looking assistants. He was some way off, and evidently unaware of my presence. I saw a sort of three-quarter length of him over a pile of toys and through an arch, and he was leaning against a pillar in an idle sort of way, doing the most horrid things with his features. The particular horrid thing he did was with his nose. He did it just as though he was idle and wanted to amuse himself. First of all it was a short blobby nose, and then suddenly he shot it out like a telescope, and then out it flew and became thinner and thinner, until it was like a long red flexible whip, like a thing in a nightmare it was. He flourished it about and flung it forth as a fly fisher flings his line. My instant thought was that Jip mustn't see him. I turned about, and there was Jip, quite preoccupied with the shopman, and thinking no evil. They were whispering together and looking at me. Jip was standing on a little stool, and the shopman was holding a sort of big drum in his hand. "Hide and seek, Dada!" cried Jip. "You're he!" And before I could do anything to prevent it, the shopman had clapped the big drum over him. I saw what was up directly. "Take that off!" I cried. "This instant! You'll frighten the boy! Take it off!" The shopman with the unequal ears did so without a word, and held the big cylinder towards me to show its emptiness. And the little stool was vacant! In that instant my boy had utterly disappeared. You know, perhaps, that sinister something that comes like a hand out of the unseen and grips your heart about. You know it takes your common self away, and leaves you tense and deliberate, neither slow nor hasty, neither angry nor afraid. So it was with me. I came up to this grinning shopman, and kicked his stool aside. "Stop this folly!" I said. "Where is my boy?" "You see," he said, still displaying the drum's interior, "there is no deception." I put out my hand to grip him, and he eluded me by a dexterous movement. I snatched again, and he turned from me and pushed open the door to escape. "Stop!" I said, and he laughed, receding. I leapt after him, into utter darkness. Thud. "Lord bless my 'eart, I didn't see you coming, sir." I was in Regent Street, and I had collided with a decent-looking working man, and a yard away, perhaps, and looking a little perplexed with himself, was Jip. There was some sort of apology, and then Jip had turned and come to me with a bright little smile, as though for a moment he had missed me. And he was carrying 4 parcels in his arm. He secured immediate possession of my finger. For the second I was rather at a loss. I stared round to see the door of the magic shop, and, behold, it was not there. There was no door, no shop, nothing, only the common pilaster between the shop where they sell pictures and the window with the chicks. I did the only thing possible in that mental tumult. I walked straight to the curbstone and held up my umbrella for a cab. "'Ansom," said Jip, in a note of culminating exultation. I helped him in, recalled my address with an effort, and got in also. Something unusual proclaimed itself in my tailcoat pocket, and I felt and discovered a glass ball. With a petulant expression I flung it into the street. Jip said nothing. For a space neither of us spoke. "Dada," said Jip at last, "that was a proper shop." I came round with that to the problem of just how the whole thing had seemed to him. He looked completely undamaged. So far good. He was neither scared nor unhinged. He was simply tremendously satisfied with the afternoon's entertainment, and there in his arms were the 4 parcels. Confound it! What could be in them? I said, "little boys can't go to shops like that every day." He received this with his usual stoicism, and for a moment I was sorry I was his father and not his mother, and so couldn't suddenly there, coram publico in our hansom, kiss him. After all, I thought, the thing wasn't so very bad. But it was only when we opened the parcels that I really began to be reassured. 3 of them contained boxes of soldiers, quite an ordinary lead soldiers, but of so good a quality as to make Jip altogether forget that originally these parcels had been magic tricks, of the only genuine sort, and the 4th contained a kitten, a little living white kitten, in excellent health and appetite and temper. I saw this unpacking with a sort of provisional relief. I hung about in the nursery for quite an unconscionable time. That happened 6 months ago, and now I am beginning to believe it is all right. The kitten had only the magic natural to all kittens, and the soldiers seemed as steady a company as any colonel could desire. And Jip? The intelligent parent will understand that I have to go cautiously with Jip. But I went so far as this one day. I said, "How would you like your soldiers to come alive, Jip, and march about by themselves?" "Mine do," said Jip. "I just have to say a word I know before I open the lid." "Then they march about alone?" "Oh, quite, Dada. I shouldn't like them if they didn't do that." I displayed no unbecoming surprise, and since then I have taken occasion to drop in upon him once or twice, unannounced, when the soldiers were about, but so far I have never discovered them performing in anything like a magical manner. It's so difficult to tell. There's also a question of finance. I have an incurable habit of paying bills. I've been up and down Regent Street several times looking for that shop. I am inclined to think, indeed, that in that manner honour is satisfied, and that, since Jip's name and address are known to them, I may very well leave it to these people, wherever they may be, to send in their bill in their own time.
So there we have it. So let's start with what we liked about this story. Maybe Simone. What did you like?
I wasn't entirely sure I did like it actually. I thought it was a bit anticlimactic actually. I thought it had a lot of interesting elements, particularly given in the mind that it's not a contemporary story. So I really enjoyed seeing a less contemporary story that had the fantastical elements, and I think the magic shop itself was quite well described with all of its oddities and fantastical bits. But I also felt like the climax kind of didn't happen, personally. Also, the first sentence was really, really long. Melody, I don't know how you managed to say it.
My great skill at reading.
I don't know. Did you guys like it?
I thought it was fun. It's fun. It's a fun story, you know. I don't think it's trying to say too much. It's just like this kid is being led on this whirlwind adventure of the magic shop, and you're supposed to be kind of drawn along with that. And you know, it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just having a bit of fun. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, the first time I read it, I agreed with that. I thought this is a fun story. I like all the random bits. I laughed when a pigeon fell out of his hat, and then all these other things came out of the hat as well. I was like, oh my God, when is this going to end? This is amazing.
Yeah, it was just so crazy. It was just like, oh, all the things you just happen to be carrying around with you.
You've even got a little demon. I was just like, wow,
I did
what?
like that bit
But
actually.
yeah, I enjoyed it.
Um, like the idea that we all carry demons around with us, I thought was a nice, subtle touch.
Yeah, it does have that kind of subtle undertone to it. Like, it makes you think, what am I carrying around with me? You know?
Yeah, you could be carrying a demon around, or all some of the other random things he had, like bird eggs and I don't know what else. I think the magician says to him something like, "Oh well, all gentlemen have strange things inside their hats, but you should probably take better care of that," or something to that effect.
Yeah, just like the little humorous lines that are
Yeah.
woven in there. I like the one. It was something like as subtle as throwing a brick at the neighbor's gramophone, or it was a silence that sharp, and I just started laughing when I read that.
Like the narrator's definitely done this, hasn't he?
He has definitely thrown a brick through someone's window at their gramophone and cut it off, and just had dead silence, and thought, "Yeah, this is this is perfect."
This is the life.
Why did you think it was sad? Like you've said, it's such a fun story and talked about all the bits that made you laugh, but your first comment was that you thought it was sad.
So I actually only I read it again today and I realized that I was dissatisfied with the ending like you, and then I was thinking about why I was dissatisfied with the ending, and I realized it was because even though the narrator has seen all these wonderful magical things right before his eyes, he still doesn't believe that they were real. And I was like, "Oh, this is sad because it means you know, in contrast with Jip the son who believes he just takes it all in, believes it straight away. I wondered if it was sort of saying, oh, when you're a grown up, even if you see something things that are amazing and magical, you don't believe that they're real, and you always spend a long time trying to find the reasoning behind it. And like, because even at the end he's saying, oh well, I still owe the magician money, like I don't understand why he hasn't sent me a bill. You know.
That is a very strange ending where he's just like, but what the heck? I never paid the bill, guys.
Yeah.
And it's because that's the last paragraph and it seems so innocuous. I think that puts quite a lot of emphasis on that.
Yeah, it frustrated me. I was like, you've gone through magical things and your concern is the bill. Like the toys coming to life and stuff. It's very much about childhood magic, isn't it, to a certain extent? Like that kind of thing. Like when children believe all that kind of things and it could be real. So it almost raises the question of did that actually happen or was that just the toy shop brought back ideas of childhood and the kind of power being a child has, and obviously now that he's an adult, he doesn't have that anymore. I just expected it to be more ominous. Maybe I'm just too used to tragedy. I thought he'd disappear in the hat and never come back.
I did wonder at that part. I was like, oh, is this story gonna suddenly get dark? But no, it was fine.
To be fair, I thought it would have been great if it did suddenly get dark. Like if I was writing it, that's what I would have gone because there's this sense of unease throughout the entire story. As like it starts with like really hilarious, as you pointed out, with him pulling stuff out of the hat. Um, but as he goes more into the magic shop and as stranger things happen and he sees demons and strange assistants that make him feel uneasy. You kind of expect it almost to go towards a more darker ending because you're, or maybe not you, but at least I kind of identified with the adult in the sense of he's watching this child be pulled along into the strange world and he doesn't know what's going to happen and he doesn't have any control over anything and he's just getting increasingly concerned. So when he vanishes, I kind of expected it to be like, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you
Yeah, I kind of liked that it definitely acknowledges that that outcome could have happened, right?
Mm.
Like that ending is definitely there. The child disappears and then everything is suddenly horrible. But I kind of like that he kind of backed away from that and went for something a bit more subtle, where it's kind of underlying that even though all this crazy stuff has happened, it still hasn't really hit home for the main character.
It grounds the story back into reality.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I was quite pleasant. It was a surprise, so I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing that it didn't go down the expected route. I think I just got thrown off by the mention of bills at the end, and it was suddenly like, oh, the author got bored of writing the story. How are we going to finish it? Oh, bills.
There were a couple of things that didn't really get explained, so I kept going back to the bit where he said that Jip was the right sort of child, and I guessed it was to do with the other child outside who was a spoilt brat, and therefore only good children could get in or something. But then I thought about it a bit more, and about what the narrator says later about Jip having his mother's ear so he could repeat the magic word, and I wondered if there was something a bit more to maybe Jip's parentage and who he was as to why he could get inside the magic shop. But then none of this is ever explained ever, and it could just be me reading too much into it. But yeah, it ends in an unsatisfactory way because I don't think it explains anything that happened in the story. So you get the frustration of the adult, what even went on?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's kind of the point, right? We don't get the explanation, and I think that's the point, is that it was supposed to be magical the whole time, but he doesn't see it. And it's interesting because for most of the story, the fact his unwillingness to play along, his cynicism is played for laughs. It's a joke. But then I think Mel's quite right to point out that at the end it kind of takes on a different note. It gets kind of sad. I think that's really interesting.
He doesn't believe the magic even when it's right there.
Yeah.
I mean, he does and he doesn't, though, because he keeps trying to catch his son with the toys come to life, so he's obviously not completely discounting it.
That's true. He's still sort of searching for it. Maybe this makes it sadder. Maybe he's if it's to do with childhood, maybe he's looking for that childhood spirit and innocence and fascination and love of things, and he can't find it anymore.
Maybe. But also, as frustrating as the end and sudden switch to payment was frustrating to me personally, it does also hark back to a lot of stories about magic and trades and magical trades in particular, because it's the idea of if you're not paying for what you've got, there's always a price, isn't there? I mean, I know that's a very adult way of thinking in that nothing comes for free. It's very cynical, but it is an idea that's often shown in magical stories, for example, like with Rapunzel or anything like that. You don't get something for free, so the fact that the payment isn't completed suggests that some kind of payment may have taken place, or that something bad is going to happen in the future in light of that.
That's interesting, because there is that line quite early on, isn't there, where they're joking about the glass balls, and he says, "Oh, I can just make them out of thin air. It's cheaper than going to the wholesaler." And there's a joke about it. But then he says, "But we do pay in the end."
Yeah.
And that's never really explained anywhere, but the line is still there.
Yeah, I think when I first read that line, I thought it was about, all magic comes with a price and it'll come out of his life force or something very contemporary like that. I don't know. Maybe he's taken the child, but they just don't realize he's taken the child yet.
Ooh, that would have been a really cool ending, actually.
Yeah.
He switched him out. He's a doppelganger.
Yeah, he's a changeling now.
Oh, that would have been cool because he did. That is part of what magicians do when they make things disappear, isn't it?
You switch it out.
Oh, I like
I
that.
just like even at the start of the story when everything seems relatively light-hearted, there's still this like dark undercurrent in there.
Hmm.
Although I must admit, the first time I read it, I was totally gypped. I was just like, I love this. This is amazing. What else can we get
Yeah.
from this magic shop? And then I read it again, and I took more of the view of the adult. I was like, there's something sinister going on here.
I was gonna say it says something about us, doesn't it? That we're looking for the catch, the horrible thing.
So, what do we think? Do we think the magician was a villain? I guess is my question.
I mean, he's not really a villain. I don't think you can argue that he's a villain.
Hence, if you think you took the child.
Well, we never really know what he's trying to do exactly, and it really seems like he's just trying to entertain this kid. You could maybe read into it a bit more and say, oh, he's trying to kidnap the child or whatever, but we never really see that. I can admit that he seems suspicious, but I don't see how you could really attribute any of his actions to malice.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I just thought it was an interesting idea that he was a villain to the narrator because he came in and went, I see your cynicism, and I'm going to now do my best to prove you're wrong.
Yeah, you could look at it that way, but it seems like he does fail if that's the case.
Yes, most definitely.
Unless Jip is the point, like he's inducting him into magic. It's not really about the adult. The adult's just there because kids don't go around without adults. Like the whole time the magician's whispering to the kid things that we as the reader and as the adult never get to hear.
That's true.
Yeah, that's possible.
I think I just look for villains everywhere. But anyway.
I was like, this is definitely a Simone question.
So what would we rate it out of 10?
Out of 10, I don't know.
I liked it, so I give it 7 out of 10. Well, I obviously liked it because I picked it for us to talk about. So,
I might go higher on that actually. I think it's now that we've talked about it a little more, I think it's really well constructed. There's a lot of character in it as well. The voice is quite strong. I might rate it to an 8.
oh, very nice, very nice.
So I didn't like this at the start of the podcast, but like you talking about it did make it seem slightly more interesting to me. But also the writing style frustrates me. I appreciate that's very much I often read contemporary things, so the older style just doesn't necessarily suit how I like to read. But also it did bother me, so I'm going to go 6.
Yeah, that's fair. There is a lot of long winding sentences in there. And there's one of them that's really repetitive where he's going on about things being rum and rumness.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, mate.
The language just wasn't beautiful and made in a way that made me think all of short story form.
That's fair, yeah.
I mean, you can tell this was written in early 1900s,
It was
right?
1903.
1903.
Yeah.
You can tell the languages about that time, but I think it's still reasonably pleasant to read. I didn't really have too much of a problem with it.
I mean, I could understand it. I just thought his sentence structure was far too long-winded. He should vary it more.
Yeah, a lot of his stories are like that. I read a few of them. You kind of have to go, is this sentence gonna like get to the point anytime soon? No? Okay.
That's interesting. I didn't really notice, but yeah, I can see your point now. There are some really long ones in there.
Yeah, it's I think we're used to more short, sharp sentences as modern readers, and we're also used to more variation in sentences. I think we have different rhythms in modern texts.
I guess we also expect stories to be more to the point because we have less time in a weird way for reading because there's so many other things competing for our
Yes,
time.
yeah. So this was published in the Strand magazine, which came out monthly in 1903. So that was it. You had your stories for the month. It's a weird to think, isn't it? Now you can just download like 25 ebooks in a single evening if you want.
I mean, I don't think I could read 25
Oh
ebooks
no,
in one
definitely
evening.
not.
Clearly, you're not trying hard enough.
That is one of the interesting things about it, though, is that we kind of expect this quite clear narrative arc in stories nowadays. Whereas at this one, I feel like it isn't clear what the arc is going to be until quite late.
It doesn't really have like the middle's really loose. Like I was thinking about it and I was like, the middle really has no structure, does it? It's just getting increasingly ridiculous and then a little bit sinister.
That's kind of what I like about it, is that it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't really need to have that driving force behind it, especially because it's not that long, and you just want to know what ridiculous thing they're going to come up with next. Like, all the tricks are so imaginative, you just don't know what's coming.
Yeah, I will say that the sense of anticipation was good, kept me going through it. I didn't know what to expect. I'm one of those annoying people who likes to guess the ending of books, and then if I'm too right, I'm disappointed, and then sometimes if I'm right, I'm disappointed as well. I'm
No winning.
like,
Just
but
can't
this didn't
win.
surprise me. There's no winning with me sometimes. So something that's completely left field and I have no idea what's going to happen is quite refreshing.
It's an interesting idea, though, that you can kind of not worry too much about some of the classical ideas of structure as long as you have something that's just really novel and fun.
Yeah, something that will make you want to keep reading it.
I think they get a lot of mileage out of the fact that there's every few paragraphs there's a pretty good joke. It keeps you going.
Humour's well used.
Okay, so we've kind of heard from Simone on this, but Mel, if you were to write this story, how do you think you might do it differently?
I think I'd be a bit more conclusive in the way that I ended it. So I think I wouldn't be as mean. I think I'd give him a glimpse of a soldier moving around, just to really like land that everything he saw was real. And I don't. I think I'd still keep that he doesn't believe it and wonders when the bill's coming. But I'd like something either way that concludes the magic thing is real. And also, I just really love the idea of there's a magic shop in the middle of London and sometimes you can't find it. That's just so cool. Maybe a bit more background about that. Because I think he says at the start that he's seen the shop before.
Yeah, I noticed that the second time I read it.
Yeah, so like I would have maybe given that some more context, like how has he seen it before? What has he seen it? Was he looking for it before? What does this really mean?
Yeah, it's a good answer.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? What would you do?
I do think the end could be jazzed up a bit. We've talked a bit about how strange the last paragraph feels, and I kind of like how weird, like it just kind of sticks out. But I think you could do something else there. I don't know what exactly, but it is kind of left somewhat ambiguous. I would have liked, kind of like you said, I think, to have that moment where you think again, maybe this was all real. Like the end of Inception where you see the top and you're like, did it wobble just a little bit? You know, something like
Oh,
that.
yes, I love the end of Inception.
Yeah, and I would have liked to see perhaps a little bit more about how the dad feels about his child enjoying it so much, because that's kind of a weird disconnect. I feel like they're contrasting how the adult feels about it and how the child feels about it. But I'd like to see that explored maybe a little bit more.
I mean, there's also 19th century masculine ideology going on a bit behind there, isn't it? Like, it's the same reason he doesn't want to kiss his kid when they're in the cab home or anything like that. It's just not what was done in that day. If you were a guy, like, you just don't express emotion, do you?
I mean, I suppose.
That part made me wonder about what happened to Jip's mother, and that made me think about what was mentioned earlier in the story about Jip having her ear, you know? It was like maybe she was a little bit magical.
Yeah, there is some kind of hints towards that. Comes back to him saying you're the right kind of boy, but we never really know what that is.
Just not like the kid on the street outside.
Pure of heart. There's never been an evil magic user ever.
I wondered if it was going for that angle, but yeah, I guess that's very fairy tale. Like, I guess fairy tale is like having like such a solid, concrete idea of people being good or evil. So I was confused because the rest of the story seems quite grounded and
But then it was the 19th century, wasn't it?
I mean, the 20th century, technically.
Right, yeah, that one.
Any final thoughts from anyone?
I guess in summary, I like the story. I think the ending was sad. I wish it was a bit more conclusive.
Yeah,
It does not inspire me to read more H.G. Wells, but it wasn't a waste of my time.
I would like to read some more of H.G. Wells stuff. I was expecting something, because he's famous for
War of
more
the
science
Worlds.
fiction, right? Yeah, War of the Worlds. So I was expecting something along those lines. This wasn't really what I expected. It just makes me curious.
The other ones I read weren't really sci-fi either. They were more urban fantasies, or one of them was like a romance parody. The girl falls for this Byronic hero, but it turns out he's really self-absorbed and a terrible boyfriend.
All right, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. You can find all of our episodes and the stories we featured in written form on our website at theshortstoryworkshop.com. Thanks again, and we'll be back with another story next week. See you then. I don't know if that's making it in.
No, you should definitely cut that out.
Cut that, definitely cut
Yeah, we're done. Great. Good job, everyone. Yay.
Thank you.
that. Go team!